Hi everyone, my name is Dylan Almendral. I'm a historian. I run the YouTube channel Vestiges of History, where objects tell of storied lives. I was asked to be here just to talk about some history of the ship during wartime, what the experience of these soldiers and passengers, and by passengers I mean POWs, that would have been like. The Queen Mary made several trips around the globe during World War II. It was the fastest ship on the water as far as a troop ship was concerned. At its peak, there were nearly 17,000 men aboard ship. That was many times over the amount of people that this ship was designed to carry. This ship saw multiple tours of duty during World War II, crammed to the absolute gills with people. And when you have that many people aboard a vessel, things fall apart, bad things happen, water becomes scarce in certain situations, food. The trips were not nearly as glamorous as what would have occurred during peacetime, that is for sure. As far as food was concerned, menus would change from the very swanky French cuisine that would have been served aboard ship to military rations, powdered eggs, and the like. Heating and cooling would have been seen as a luxury. Many military officers would have been bunked up 3-4 to a room. Enlisted men would have slept in multi-level bunks below decks. That would include sleeping in a hammock on a scaffolding in the bows of the ship, including the pool. German POWs would have been in far below decks in the brig, where they were crammed in there, very little fresh air, sanitation at a minimum, and God knows what else would occur down there. There was also an isolation ward where men that had malaria or other infectious diseases or were recent amputees, they were kept to keep them from being susceptible to any diseases aboard ship.
And nowhere's really safe.
No, there were disease vectors throughout the ship because water quality was not the best. Humans can't drink seawater. Most times you would have fuel leaking into the water reserve here aboard ship, and that's not including STDs that would be present, because that was a major problem with the military in World War II, which no one talks about. Same problem in World War I.
And we're here to talk about the shit nobody talks about. So tell us all the
dirty deed.
As a passenger liner, this was the best ship on the water. As a troop ship, it was seen as a definite step up, but its job was to carry men. That's it. No glamour, no waiters. To get a stateroom, you had to be a general. But more often than not, the rooms were subdivided by temporary walls and bedding. It would be far from the level of comfort that we see today on the ship.
I wonder if that's what's going on in this room.
No, yeah, this would have been a suite for families before the war. But also, the ship has undergone so many changes in the peacetime, wartime, and post-war period that the layouts for certain rooms did definitely change. Like, given that those are pocket doors, that would have probably been a room for... Because remember, we are on the upper decks. Mm-hmm. The higher you are up on the ship, the more expensive your ticket was. Okay. So, like that small room in the corner was probably for a nanny.
Yeah.
This room would have been for children or whomever else, and that would have been the master bedroom. This would have been a common room here.
But what do you think during wartime?
This would have been like room assignments. There would be cots in here. That's it. Yeah, when this was a troop ship, it basically fill every inch with people or supplies. That's it.
You knew some people that actually traveled on the ship during that time. Would you share some of their stories and what they said?
One of those gentlemen was Paul J. Cote. He passed away in 2002, I believe. He returned to the United States on the Queen Mary. He was a D-Day planner. He was actually one of the only people to be in every military headquarters in England. He was at 8th Fighter Headquarters, 8th Air Force Headquarters at High Wycombe. He was at SHAEF, Supreme Allied Headquarters in London, flown to Germany to secure Gestapo barracks for a Allied headquarters there. His stories of his time aboard ship as a returning GI, just being crammed into a small bunk area. He was not an officer, so he was not afforded any privacy. The lines for food were very long. Water, fresh water was rare if you could find it. Gambling was everywhere, which led to a lot of fights. The Army would confiscate any weapons that were brought on board, but of course GIs would bring stuff in Lugers and P-38s and whatever. They would bring that, daggers as well, bring that aboard ship, hidden, and then they would use that to gamble as currency.
Oh.
Yeah, but through that, a lot of violence also occurred, which you don't talk about.
But we do.
Yeah.
I did a simple Google search the other day about the German prisoners of war that were brought over. It paints a very pretty picture. They're very excited that they were treated like kings and got their own rooms and delicious food.
I mean, the German relationship with America is really, really interesting because we were almost a German-speaking nation in the beginnings of our history. To be a German brought to America meant you essentially won the lottery. We were the land of plenty. We still are in many ways. Yeah, the situation here aboard ship would have not been comfortable at all. Like, they would have eaten rations, same as the Americans, but probably a little bit lesser in quality. Sanitation would have been at a minimum. They would have been guarded most of the time. They would have been susceptible to violence some of the time. Whatever level of comfort would be afforded to an enlisted man, just run-of-the-mill GI aboard ship here, would have been a major upgrade for any POWs aboard ship in the below decks. The records of death, especially during exigent circumstances like war, I would question that because it's also a PR thing. Keep in mind, you want your GIs aboard ship from the United States en route to Europe and vice versa, returning from Europe to feel safe. Though the major thing going for it was speed. Being able to traverse, I believe she made the trip from Southampton in something like 3 days and 23 hours, which was a record. When it comes to recording deaths, I would not hesitate to guess that those numbers are fudged because you're looking at diseases, violence, sudden deaths having to do with like heart attacks, asthmatic attacks, panic attacks, suicides.
So if you had to guess, throw a number, like how many people you think died on the ship?
I mean, conservative, probably around maybe 2 to 5% of all.
Everyone that passed through?
Yeah. Especially on the way back, you had a lot of guys suffering from PTSD, from things they saw, things they had to do. It would have been, might have been, could have been relatively easy to just jump off and not be noticed. The realities of war are terrible.
And then living in such a tight hell, it sounds like hell.
The positive side of that, though, is you're also among men who went through the same, can I curse? You went through the same shit that you did. So that's why we start to see returning GIs acclimating in far greater numbers to civilian life because they had that point of decompression from combat zone to civilian life aboard ships like these. When you look at in comparing World War II to like the Vietnam War, there was this expanse of time where a GI would be able to decompress among people he knew or suffered with. In Vietnam, for instance, you could be in Hanoi and back in San Francisco or Los Angeles in 24 hours by plane. So that distance of being able to make sense of things, get right with yourself, was not afforded to those soldiers during the Vietnam War.
So it was healing for some.
In a way, yeah. I would say for the majority. So there is a kind of a silver lining to the Gray Ghost.
So that would be a reason that someone maybe who passed would return even though they haven't died here. Like it's where they heal.
The transference of energies for sure, especially for, the younger soldiers who knew the Queen Mary as a passenger liner. It would have been cool for them to come, to make their voyage back home to their families aboard this ship. That would have been memorable for them. And this was also a symbol of, it's finally over, I get to go home. And, aboard ship you'd also have like the Red Cross would be here offering as many distractions as possible. Lots of games, lots of activities outside of the gambling. There was also some rehabilitative elements to the Red Cross being aboard ship.
So it happened more than once. It wasn't just one ship full of 16,000 people.
Oh, yeah. The Queen did something like 37,000 nautical miles throughout the war. A little bit over that. But, she is one of hundreds of troop ships that were pressed into service.
And what about the animal thing you were talking about? Because I never heard that before.
Instances where pets were brought aboard ship, and if they were discovered, pets would not have been allowed. So they would have been destroyed in as humane a way as possible. Sometimes it didn't work that way, sometimes it did. But because pets are, vectors for disease because they could carry fleas. Cats and dogs carry fleas. Then you could have, in the worst of cases, plague outbreak or rashes, infectious diseases. October of 42, the Queen ran into, basically split the Kurakoa apart. Something around 300 lives were lost in that incident. So driving a ship is way harder because
Especially going so fast.
yeah, it requires a lot of math. You have to direct the ship in such a way where you are sending signals down to the engines to either supply more power or less power, where to apply the rudder, in what direction, and these moves have to be pre-calculated in such a way involving distance and speed to mitigate any collisions, and sometimes it didn't work. If you are traveling at night on the Atlantic, using blackout, that was a major problem. When you would have massive convoys of troop ships.
Because you're trying to go undetected.
Yes.
So the people that were on that ship was like a soldier ship as well.
Yeah. That was a cruiser. That would have been a troop ship escort.
Man, that must have been really hard to deal with.
In that situation.
What did they do?
In that
They
situation, no.
They just kept going?
It's too late, probably at that point.
With that, as the convoy is moving, other ships passing by after them might have been able to pick up men, but not all of them.
Yeah, you're not going to live too long.
No.
Well, and as fast as she was, there was no way she was going to turn around.
No, yeah.
Giant propellers?
Yeah.
People are going to get sucked into the,
Oh, it was probably so bad. It was probably so bad.
oh.
Yeah, the wake would have been bad.
Yeah.
The weird thing that's like been happening for me today while we're here, I don't know what it is, but it's just like being able to picture it and hear it so clearly when we're talking about this. And I've never really had that feeling before. But so what would a pentagram looking symbol mean, like in military terms, for this ship?
Designed for a patch in the Army. Mm-hmm. That could also be an insignia for the U.S. Army, like on a uniform, not a patch. It could be any number of things, really.
But it really ties in with like military and...
Yeah.
No, the military loves stars. The Navy loves stars. A lot of sailors today get nautical star tattoos on their arms for service. The star would have been prevalent, aboard ship as a symbol in military heraldry for sure.
Any other involvement with the war, or was it just purely just transporting?
Yeah, purely as a troop ship, and also bringing back wounded. Okay, so early on in the war, they would take supplies and troops to the different theaters of war in mostly Europe, the Mediterranean and such. But on the way back, they would bring back wounded. Now, it wasn't a designated hospital ship. It would have been administered by the Army, maybe the Navy, with probably Red Cross personnel as well.
And see, now you're talking about casualties again because you're bringing over wounded.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're talking about infections and maybe I've heard stories about babies being born in the nursery.
Before and after the war, children were born aboard ship for sure. Yeah.
Would there be any prostitution on the ship?
Oh shit.
Well, because that's kind of what we were. That's kind of what we were getting. So we don't know.
Yeah, there are stories that the Grey Ghost is not going to give up. Yeah.
So if you would guess from the history and what you know about this boat, if you're going to catch some kind of activity, where would you go hunt?
Pretty much every deck has something, but below decks where it's less populated, where things are left more or less alone, that's where things usually happen. Yeah, y'all can find me at Vestiges of History on YouTube, or if you want to find my most popular video, that's going to be Lee Marvin, the stories of a World War II scout sniper, for those that remember the actor Lee Marvin. I did a story of his military service told through his uniforms. Vestiges of History exists for the purposes of making sure that untold stories get told and that people are not forgotten, because I believe that you don't really die when you die. Sure, your body stops functioning and your mind is no longer existing, but you only die when people stop saying your name and they stop telling your story. I rage against that machine.
So you do that with, living old people, and I do that with the dead old people. So make sure you guys subscribe, check out his shit, and maybe we'll have him back because he knows a lot of history. Yes, the link will be down in the description. So thank you for sharing what you know.